Hi everybody, welcome to my channel. What I thought I'd do today is talk a bit more about my experience so far with the Lumix ZS200. People saw the original video. I replaced my ZS100 with a brand new Lumix ZS200, which I found, there was reports early on when this camera came out, quite a while ago now, that the lens was soft. I think that had to do with copy variation, and it may well be that in the early product runs there was more variation than there is now. But I found the lens on this camera to be sharp in the center and across the frame at all focal lengths. Hasn't been a real issue. But when you use a camera like this, and the great thing about this camera is you can take it with you anywhere pretty much, but there's always going to be compromises. So especially with this long focal range that it has, so from 24 equivalent to 360 millimeter equivalent, but the aperture range is from f3.3 to f6.3, so it's not a fast lens. And that on a dull day like we're having right now, I think it's actually snowing a bit right now, but on a dull day when you have to raise your ISO, 1-inch sensor camera, obviously going to have issues when they raise the ISO compared to larger sensors, even micro four thirds sized sensors. So thought what I would do is show some examples. Recently I was walking through a park in Oak Park. It's just right off the main drag. It's about a block off the main drag through downtown Oak Park, Illinois. And there was a flock of robins, and there's a hawthorn tree, and the hawthorn had berries on it, which are actually called haws. And robins are pretty much omnivorous. So they were not a lot of insects to eat right now in the autumn, so they're busy gobbling up berries. And I got some shots at full telephoto plus a video with this camera, and we're going to take a look at what I think was the best shot, because since I didn't raise the shutter speed past 1/320th of a second to try and keep the ISO down, the ISO was 800. That's not fast enough to freeze a bird completely, because birds move a lot. So I'll show you guys what happens when you fix that in Topaz Photo AI. And also, after that I thought, well, I should see how well you can deal with the noise that's inherent in this kind of a camera with things like Topaz Photo AI and the new, relatively new Denoise feature in Adobe Lightroom. I should say that given the technology, and I've mentioned this in the upcoming clips, that the ISO 6400, which is what I raised it to, is not as bad as you might think. I mean, it's still pretty grainy, but it's really surprisingly not absolutely horrible like things would have been a decade ago for a smaller sensor camera. So here are those clips, and I'll go through first. The first clip is of a shot of the robin, the American robin, and I just used Topaz Photo AI's sharpening on that one, because one of the things is that the JPEG sharpening in the Lumix cameras is actually, I think, pretty good. And I have that turned down to the lowest possible value. It doesn't shut completely off. But high ISO images, if you're shooting JPEG, even in the micro four thirds cameras, are pretty decent. I mean, since I do photojournalism work, I submit JPEGs, so I submit the out-of-camera JPEGs with a few tweaks, and I've submitted up to 6400 ISO 4/3 images that are fine for publishing in a paper and publishing online. It's not an issue. So anyway, here, without further ado, are the clips, and I will be back with a follow-up. So as I mentioned, I was walking through this park and came across this hawthorn tree. Pretty sure there's a native hawthorn tree, and there were a lot of robins, American robins, flocking in the park. The berries of the hawthorn tree, they're called haws, were being paid special attention to by these birds. So they were coming into the hawthorn tree and grabbing the berries, and I had, as I mentioned, I only had my Lumix ZS200 with me, because generally on these walks I don't take a lot of equipment. And so I grabbed some shots, and here's one. I shot this, if you look here at the upper left, I shot this at 1/320th of a second, f6.4 at ISO 800. Didn't really want to go any faster in shutter speed because I was trying to keep the ISO down. And this is a straight out camera JPEG, natural profile. And if you look here in the center, you can see that the berries are actually pretty sharp. The leaf is sharp. The bird's head and the bird not so much. And that's because, obviously, birds move a lot. Even when they're sitting still, they're moving. So this robin was moving. By the way, this is probably a male because it's got a darker head. Females don't. So what I did was I just decided to put it through Topaz Photo AI. This was a JPEG, so I couldn't do raw processing. So I just put it in a Topaz and I'll put it as a JPEG and got this. And now, if you look here, the head of the robin is sharp. You know, is it as good as if I had used a higher shutter speed and sharpened this on, you know, gotten it sharp out of the camera? Yeah, maybe not, but I think it's still sharp enough to actually print and get a fairly decent print out of it. Another image. This was taken in the same park as the American Robin image, and I wanted to see if we took a really high ISO photo from the ZS200, what you could do with the various means of noise reduction. This image is pretty sharp. I mean, it doesn't really need to be sharpened. But as you see up here in the upper left corner, shot it at ISO 6400, and it was an overcast day, but fairly bright, and the shutter speed was 1/2500th of a second at f6.3 at 32.2 millimeters, which, if you're full frame terms, you just multiply that number by 2.7. That gets you the full frame equivalent. So if you look at this image, you can see, yeah, it's very noisy. When you scroll down here into this corner, you can see all this noise. You see this noise in the grass. But I will say that considering the size of a 1-inch sensor, it's not as bad as I would have expected. And I had the original Canon 5D. You really were pushing it if you went to ISO 1600. So if you think about the advances in technology, that's why we're here where we're at. So what I did was I used a couple different ways of dealing with the noise, Topaz, and I also used the built-in Denoise feature in Lightroom. And so we'll go on to those. I used Topaz Photo AI. And Topaz, the nice things about it is, one, you can use it on JPEGs. You don't have to use it on a RAW file. This, by the way, is the original is a RAW converted to DNG by Lightroom. And so you can run Topaz Photo AI and you can output to a JPEG. And that's kind of a really nice, quick way to do it. However, and let's just take a look at this. This image is a resulting image of outputting to a JPEG. And the one thing that I notice is that, like, especially if you look down here, I mean, let's look at the grass. You see the grass is pretty cleaned up. But if you look down here and you look at this leaf in the lower left-hand corner that I'm circling, it has this plastic look to it, which I'm not crazy about. I mean, if you look at the surrounding leaves, yeah, everything's sharp, but there's this plasticky look to it. So I would only use this as just kind of a quick way of exporting. You know, in a print, maybe it doesn't matter. At some point, I mean, this image is not one that I would actually print, just using it for demonstration purposes. Next, we'll actually use the Lightroom Denoise feature. What you get after you use Lightroom's Denoise feature. And actually, if we go over to the develop module, you'll see it's right down here in details. You've got sharpening, but you also have the Denoise function. It says denoise has been applied to this photo. So you can only do it one time, which is probably a good thing, right? But if you look at the grass, you'll see that it's done a really good job of getting rid of the noise. The other thing is, if you look here, you can see a little bit more detail than you do in the JPEG output. And definitely when you look down at this leaf, it doesn't have that plasticky look. This is a nice feature. It generates a DNG, so you have to start with a DNG, and it generates a DNG. And that DNG for this image, which of course from a 20 megapixel sensor, is actually a 52.45 megabyte image. If you look over here in the lower right where you have the file info in the library module. So that's not bad. It's a pretty big file, but it's not gigantically huge. Now let's see what happens when you actually use the raw processing that Topaz has. There's two ways to do this. You can right-click and go to Edit and Topaz Photo AI, and that's going to give you the choice of either processing it to a DNG or processing it to a JPEG. But when you first install Topaz Photo AI, you get a message telling you that the best way to do it is to go to the File menu, go down to your plug-in extras, and find Process in Topaz in that menu and do it that way. You can turn that message off. I got annoyed with it, so I turned it off. But if we look at this image, you can see right away it's kind of close to what you get when you use the built-in Lightroom denoise. So cleans this up pretty well. If you look down here, you don't get that plasticky look that you get when you process it to a JPEG. So this works really well. The one problem is, and if you look at the file size, the DNG, Topaz outputs a DNG, but it is 114 megabytes. So it is a big file. And one of the ways that I dealt with this is that I set up an export routine in Lightroom that will export this to a JPEG, and it will actually save the JPEG to the same folder that the original image is in and add it to the catalog. So it'll pop up down in your film strip down at the bottom. So there's one thing to be aware of. If that file is too big for you to hold on to, it's easy enough to process it to the JPEG. The JPEG is not going to have that plasticky look, and you can delete the over 100 megabyte DNG file because it's easy enough to redo it if you need to. Okay, so that's examples of what you can do to deal with the compromises that you get in a camera like this. And there's ways of dealing with that. So I wouldn't hesitate to, when we go on vacation, just take this camera, depending on where we're going. I mean, if we're going on vacation to a city, I would take this camera. It's unobtrusive, doesn't attract a lot of attention. In fact, I shot an entire photojournalism assignment with this camera on the architecture of the west side of Chicago. And Chicago is a big city. It gets a bad rap as being a dangerous city. It's really not, but like any city on this planet, there are places where you probably want to be careful when you go into them or not go into them. I don't have the luxury of that in my job. So what I did is I shot this entire story with this, because I could drive to the location that I was shooting, hop out of the car, get the shots I needed, get back in the car, and be good. So I'll link to that story down in the description. There's a bank where the photos of the bank are not mine, but the rest of them are. And they were all shot with the Lumix ZS200. In summary, as far as the ZS200 is concerned, I really like this camera. I really like being able to grab this when I go out for a walk and not have to take anything else and know that I'm going to get some pretty good pictures if something worthwhile photographing pops up. So, hey, if this was useful, interesting, helpful to you, please pop that thumbs up, like button. It's a great help to me. Any questions, comments, put them down in the comment field. I answer those as soon as I can. I try to put up content as often as I can, of course, with my job. Sometimes I can't get to it as frequently as I would want to, but it is what it is. So thanks for watching. I'm Todd Banner. I'll see you next time.